Good day, folks, and welcome to the Anorak Review Show with your host, the Anorak. It was 55 years ago today that the Beatles taught the world to play, going in and out of style, but always guaranteed to raise a smile. So may I introduce to you to the album that you've all known for all these years, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Many, if not all of the Beatles albums have simply iconic cover artworks. And this one is absolutely no exception. A colourful, vibrant and elaborate display of not only the Fab Four themselves in bright Edwardian military band style uniforms, but a ranged crowd of life-size hardboard cutouts of various musicians, celebrities, Hollywood stars, philosophers, politicians, etc. Some you might recognize right away, and some you might not at first glance until you look up a bit of research. In fact, there were even a few wild suggestions that never made it into the final shoot, particularly from John Lennon, such as Gandhi, Jesus, and I'm not kidding, Adolf Hitler. The Führer. You can imagine why they excluded him. As for the former two, Gandhi was removed under fear that the album wouldn't sell as well in India. And Jesus, well, mostly because of Lennon's recent and controversial statement about how the Beatles were apparently more popular than Jesus. Those aside, this is a great and well-detailed album cover. I can talk some more about this cover, as well as a bit of a brief as possible history behind the album and its production and its background, but let's just jump into the music itself and hope that we enjoy the show. Our album begins, of course, with its titular track, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. We first hear the sounds of an orchestra setting up while a crowd audience murmur among themselves, already immersing us into this musical world, this alternate musical world. And soon enough, we get some sweet guitar riffs from the late great John Lennon and George Harrison. When the first verse kicks in, sung, or rather shouted by Paul McCartney, introduces us to the fictional band of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. The idea behind this would be that the Beatles would individually take on these alter egos of theirs as an opportunity to distance themselves from previous music they had done before and explore a bigger range of various musical styles and fusions, like big band music, baroque, vaudeville, cabaret, psychedelia, etc., especially after having quitted live performances altogether. The name itself apparently came from when a roadie asked Paul what the S and P stood for in those salt and pepper shakers while they were having an in-flight meal, which Paul answered by stating, well, salt and pepper. I guess it's possible that his full rank and name would be Sergeant Sultan Pepper. And after we hear Paul shout out the actual name of the band, we get greeted by the sounds of a crowd cheering as well as a quartet of French horns playing along, once again giving us that prom concert / marching band vibe. Then John and George sing the chorus / refrain in that familiar Beatles-style harmony vocal manner, announcing themselves as the very club band itself. And afterwards, Paul sings one last verse before he introduces us to one other particular member of the band besides the sergeant, which fittingly segs us into the very next song. That song being With a Little Help from My Friends, featuring Ringo Starr as fellow Lonely Hearts Club Band member Billy Shears. The music itself tones down and chills down a bit into this sweet, humble and mellow piece with Ringo, or rather Billy, taking centre stage with his drums and tambourine while George plays his weeping guitars, Paul plays piano and his usual left-hand bass, and John plays cowbell. You see, even the Beatles gotta have more cowbell. Like with the previous tracks, the lyrics here have a bit of a self-aware attitude to it, acknowledging themselves as a band and singer and all, especially when Ringo asks us what we'd think if he accidentally sang out of key or tune. I think a lot of up-and-coming, self-conscious singers and musicians, like myself, can and do worry about whether or not we're even hitting the exact, perfect, and right notes and pitch, and we can definitely relate to that. But of course, as the chorus goes, Ringo/Billy gets by and is going to try with a little help from his friends. The other Beatles, or rather, Sgt. Pepper and the other Lonely Hearts. And ironically, Ringo is actually the eldest of the Fab Four, with George being the youngest and John and Paul being the middle ones. And yes, he does also say, I get high with a little help from my friends. And I'm very sure people out there are already jumping to conclusions that this song in particular is about drugs and all that and whatnot. And to that I say, yeah, it's kind of true that the Beatles may have been high on acid when they came up with stuff like this, but you never know, could just be a coincidence, nothing more, just saying. And then the later verses, John and Paul, one of them possibly being Sgt. Pepper himself, sing in this call and response manner with Ringo, such as whether he believes in love at first sight, or what he sees when the lights are turned out. And I wonder what his answer would be if Cher asked him if he believes in life after love. Next up is another classic Beatles song that I don't think needs an actual introduction. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. And once again, yes, I know that the capitalized initials stand for LSD, and the name itself came from a drawing that John's son Julian Lennon made as a little kid after a particular girl and classmate he had a bit of a crush on, and he showed said drawing to his dad, which inspired the title of the song. Now, unless you want to convince me that a 3-year-old was somehow high as well, I'm resting my case. Now, to be fair, drug use may have had some ounce of influence over some of the imagery shown in the lyrics and in the overall composition. But at the same time, it's not just all about drugs, despite what some may tell you. Part of it were actually also inspired by the Lewis Carroll Alice books, Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. And I highly doubt that he, or anyone else for that matter back then, had access to hallucinogenic drugs back in the 1860s and 70s. In fact, the Alice novels also served partial inspiration for another well-known Beatles song, I Am the Walrus, particularly from the Walrus and the Carpenter poem. Anyways, all that said, the music itself does indeed evoke a sense of psychedelia, especially with the exotic instruments utilized, such as a tampura, which could be seen as a similar instrument to a sitar, both being Indian in origin, as well as a low-ray organ and an electric guitar being played through a Leslie speaker. I also like how, especially by the chorus and by the end, Paul plucks at his bass as if it were an actual double bass, again keeping in with the Sgt. Pepper Club Band concept. Regardless of however you may interpret it, it's still a very sweet and fun song that is so far out there, man. Literally, it's very out there. After that is Getting Better, another happy-go-lucky rock tune with Paul on lead vocals, with a simple, uplifting, and optimistic feel and tone. Here he sings about how he has been mad about school, the tutors just weren't cool, and filling his head with rules. I guess he don't need no educational thought control. He used to be so mad and angry that he even sings in Grimlock caveman talk in the second verse. Me used to be very angry young man, me hiding me head in the sand. Because poor literacy is getting better all the time. And then in the third verse, he then goes on how he used to be cruel to his woman, implying to have been abusive to her. Yeah, John himself stated how he wasn't exactly proud of certain things he had done in past relationships, but of course in the same verse, they say they're changing their scene and doing the best they can, openly stating their regret and determination to be a better person. The choruses really drive this home. By being better and doing better ourselves, things around us might get better as well. Even while John's possibly sarcastic backing vocals say how it can't get no worse, Paul still maintains that sense of hope, sincerity, and optimism. With that, this song could perhaps also be seen as an insight into the character of Sgt. Pepper himself, or some other nameless club band member that Paul may sing as here. As Eric Idle would say, always look on the bright side of life. Then we have Fixing a Hole, featuring a bit of a harpsichord played by Paul himself on top of his bass and leading vocals, adding a bit of a baroque feel to it. This time he sings about wanting to just relax and let his mind wander for at least, attempting to fix a hole where the reins of depression, anxiety, and pessimism come in, distracting him with so many bad thoughts and just bad ideas. But ultimately, it doesn't matter to him personally if he's wrong or right in anyone's eyes, as long as he knows where he belongs. He also observes people standing outside who disagree, never win, and they wonder why they don't get in past his door. That part here was inspired, apparently, by the number of fans that would swarm and hang around outside his house nearly 24/7. So yeah, definitely a good thing they don't break down his door or come in through the bathroom window. And partway through the song, we also get a bit of a cool, distorted, syncopated guitar solo from George, possibly one of my favourite guitar solos of his. In fact, the very title itself, Fixing a Hole, or the line of Fixing a Hole where the rain comes in, would also inspire Beatles fanboy Jeff Lynne for one lyric in his song Evil Woman. There's a hole in my head where the rain comes in. So yeah, bit of an influence from Beatles, another bit of influence of the Beatles into ELO. The Baroque influences continue with She's Leaving Home. This time we have an arrangement of actual stringed orchestral instruments, including a harp being played by Sheila Bromberg, who sadly passed away last year, as long as she's playing that good song with John and George. Paul's solemn voice and the somber strings may also call to mind the song of Eleanor Rigby from the Revolver album, which I reviewed last year, or even early Electric Light Orchestra. Its lyrics about a girl running away from home and escaping her dysfunctional parents were apparently inspired by a news story that Paul read one day on the Daily Mirror. Wait, hang on. New petition against taxes? Building codes under fire? Literally under fire? While Paul sings most, if not all, the lyrics, John does contribute by co-writing and singing the chorus as well. Ringo and George weren't involved in this one at all, of course, having no guitars and drums and all. While not as memorable and grandiose as Eleanor Rigby, She's Leaving Home is still fine on its own as is. It may or may not be something to write home about. Side 1 ends with Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite, heavily inspired by an actual poster for an old circus in the 1840s, right down to taking the title from one of the scriptures of the poster. Although I bet someone out there would argue and claim that the initials BBMK also stand for some kind of drug or something. I don't know, wouldn't surprise me. On top of most of the lyrics here being based around descriptions from this particular poster, the music itself has a very fitting carnival circus feel to it as well. Besides John, who does his lead vocals, which are double tracked as with most of the stuff, we also get harmonicas, harmoniums, calliopes, a glockenspiel, a bit of mellotron, and a range of organs such as Hammond, low re again, and a Wurlitzer, or Wurlitzer. I probably butchered that wrong. Most of it was tasked and achieved by the late great George Martin, who produced most, if not all, of the Beatles' songs and albums. Because of his extensive contributions as a producer to such a band, he is often referred to as the fifth Beatle, as if Stuart Sutcliffe and Pete Best wouldn't have a word with that. A good chunk of the instrumentation here were kind of sort of cut up and put together into tape loops, adding this dense amount of layers to the track, similar to something like Tomorrow Never Knows or Strawberry Fields Forever. Among the many possibly real-life people that John mentions in the song, he also mentions a family called the Hendersons. No doubt they brought along a Bigfoot named Harry for display in the circus. Then, just after John sings a line of Henry the Horse dances the waltz, what else follows but a bit of waltz? Almost like we've entered this rock and roll version of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang or Disney's Dumbo. Whether it be the original or Tim Burton's version, I'll leave to you. And after that bit, John mentions that the band begins at 10 to 6, which means about 5:50 p.m. And it's likely he could very well refer to the Lonely Hearts Club Band performing at this circus. It may not be intentional on part of the songwriters, but I think it'd be a very cool way of maintaining this alter ego band concept.